Our natural resources are no longer abundant. We are more threatened by climate risk. Our population needs are ever increasing. There are those who think that water should be a free good. It's a right, just as clean air is. However, these goods don't get provided for free. You need to allocate resources to sustain them. You don't get people to move until something bad happens. We need to price the bads and the goods that are inadvertently generated in the way we use nature. Users pay, beneficiaries pay, damagers or polluters pay. Without P-WES, our watersheds will deteriorate. We will not be able to contribute more revenue for rehabilitating. We will not be able to make people realize that water is scarce and they should change their behavior in the way they use water. P-WES is the way forward. It will assure the young folks that resources and ecosystem services will still be there for them to benefit from. I think we need to get our act together. Academics need to work with other think tanks. Seldom do you have evolution unless you have brave policymakers and implementers. And the more the academics come up with their studies, the more they have the data to convince legislators to move ahead with this. Hello, I'm Marian de Los Angeles, natural resource and environmental economist, and I am advocating for payments for ecosystem services, which are empirically based, science-based, and negotiated through participatory action research.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Let's get ready to explore the future of payment for water ecosystem in the Philippines through global perspectives this afternoon. This webinar is brought to you by UPLB-INREM through the DOST cards funded project advocating for the institutionalization of payment for water ecosystem services in the Philippines. I'm Check Tatlonghari, a project staff, and also part of the UPLB-INREM's Public Education and Capacity Development Program. We're excited to have you join us this afternoon as we listen to the insights from our three esteemed experts on payments for ecosystem services. Dr. Beria Lemona, Dr. Stefano Pagiola, and Dr. Marian de Los Angeles. Okay, so for today, we'll be fast forwarding to the future to take a glimpse of what P-WES can, where P-WES can be a powerful financial mechanism for environmental conservation in the Philippines. Looking at the initial participant list, okay, we're excited to see people from the government agents, government even and okay. If you can, please comment on please and where you are from. Thank you. Okay. So we can mention the names and institutions from time to time to recognize your participation in this seminar. Okay, let us see the chat box. Okay. Anyway, you can do this, no? During the entire seminar naman. So we recognize the participation of Forest Foundation, Philippines, represented by Eric Buduan. Thank you, sir, for attending the seminar. And Forest Foundation is actually one of our valuable partners of INREM. Okay. And and we have here also coming from CESAM, you student, in the person of Stewart, and also coming from the house. Thank you, sir, for attending, no, on our actually providing a strong support, no, to the institutionalization of payment for water ecosystem services in the Philippines. And we have also from Mindanao, okay? So Mindanao is represented here. Eliza May, thank you for participating. All right. So we can see, no, the and kick off our our webinar. We have UPLB-INREM, Dr. Joaquin. The floor is all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's session, which is not only the final installment of the P-WES webinar series, but also the fourth and last episode of this year's INREM 360 webinar series. INREM 360 webinar series is an initiative designed to disseminate UPLB-INREM's research and other relevant studies, educate the public on pressing INREM-related challenges, provide valuable insights for policy and institutional reforms, and promote transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary collaboration through dialogue among researchers, practitioners, policymakers, civil society, and other stakeholders. By situating today's discussion within INREM 360, we affirm that P-WES is a part of a broader institutional effort to advance knowledge, foster collaboration, and shape responsive governance for our natural resources. Over the past months, the P-WES webinar series has guided us through diverse dimensions of payments for water ecosystem services, from field realities and community perspectives to economic mechanisms and institutional challenges. This afternoon, we will take another step forward. Our theme, What Lies Ahead? The Future of P-WES in the Philippines through Global Perspectives, invites us to grow. It is a vision for sustainable water governance. It asks us to stewardship is not only valued but sustained. As we look ahead, the challenge is clear. How do we build systems that are globally informed, locally grounded, and institutionally resilient? This afternoon, we are privileged to hear from distinguished experts whose work has shaped PES initiatives worldwide. Dr. Stefano Pipaggiola, the senior environmental economist of the World Bank, will share insights from decades of global PES implementation, highlighting lessons that can guide our own efforts. Dr. Beria Leimona, theme leader for climate change, energy, and low carbon development at C4ECROP, will bring perspectives on PES in the context of climate resilience and sustainable development. We are also honored to have Dr. Marian S. De Los Angeles, chairman of the board of RICS, and one of my favorite professors, as our reactor. With her expertise
Mm. Okay, we're having some
help
audio
us
technical.
P-WES.
Sorry for some technical problems. Dr. Pulkin,
We apologize. We have very poor internet connection. Let me continue.
okay. Go ahead, sir.
As we engage in our dialogue today, let us remember this is not simply about adapting models from abroad. It is also about learning, adapting, and co-creating systems that honor both ecological integrity and human dignity. It is about ensuring that those who care for ecosystems are not left behind, but are recognized as partners in our collective future. To our speakers, thank you for sharing your expertise. To our participants, thank you for your time, curiosity, and commitment. And to our partners and collaborators, thank you for walking with us in this journey towards institutionalizing P-WES in the Philippines. Let us make this session a space for critical reflection, open dialogue, and bold imagining. May today's discussion inspire new pathways towards inclusive, effective, and globally informed environmental governance. Again, welcome once again, and I look forward to a rich exchanges ahead. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Fulhin, our founding director at UPLB-INREM. What an exciting start, no? Truly setting the stage for the discussions, for the rich discussions ahead. Okay, so live count update. So we have more than 70 participants already joining us this afternoon for our webinar. Okay, and now without further ado, it's my pleasure to reintroduce Dr. Beria Leymona. Okay, so let me share with you some background information about our speaker. Dr. Beria Leymona is the team leader for climate change, energy, and low carbon development. As a senior scientist in climate change policy and innovative finance, she led global research for development initiatives within C4 ECRAF, no? Focusing on climate change mitigation and adaptation, sustainability standards and certification, and jurisdictional approach. Her expertise extends to smallholder financing, ecosystem services, and carbon markets, working closely with governments, private sectors, actors, and NGOs. Okay? She actively leads resource mobilization efforts with international donors and private sectors. In addition, she has served as lead author for two intergovernmental science policy platforms on biodiversity and ecosystem services reports, contributing to global assessments on biodiversity and evaluation of nature. To talk about the perspectives on PES, no, or payment for ecosystem services in the context of climate resilience and sustainable development, let us all welcome Dr. Beria Leymona.
Thank you, Rosario, for such a comprehensive introduction. And I'm really honored to join this webinar, especially meeting all my mentors here. Dr. Marian de Los Angeles, Dr. Stefano Pagiola, they are my mentor in starting the work of the payment for ecosystem services. I'm really honored to join the webinar together with them. And also thank you for Dr. Yuan Pulhin and Dr. Canesio Predo, both are my excellent colleagues. So really happy to reunite in this session. As mentioned by Dr. Rosario, so my presentations will share about how the payment ecosystem services develop in many settings, especially the financing setting of the integrated landscape finance. And in these occasions, I will also share one case study that we conducted in Indonesia, providing you how the evidence-based, data-driven payment for watershed services can be done, as well as to link between the upstream as well as downstream initiative to ensure that when we are talking about the payment for ecosystem services, it's not about the upstream of the watershed, but also knowing how it links with the demand side of the watershed. So let me just share my screen. And as we know that today we are in a critical juncture where financing for climate and environmental goals must move beyond fragmented and project-based approaches. And for years, as we know as well, that PES has served as a fundamental instrument to reward the landholders, the local community, maintaining ecosystem services, such as clean water, carbon, biodiversity. However, we need also to realize that PES has proven incentive work, especially tied to the performance base, not should be alone in the case of its implementation. It needs to understand that how PS needs to operate in more integrated framework to ensure that there are scale to be achieved in a complex and multiple use of landscape. So in this slide, you can see that effective landscape management, meaning that approaching what's so-called the landscape approach, must somehow understand the interconnected within the landscape. How landscape form a complex socio-ecological system and how it's shaped by the local culture, geographies, and economies. So it also means that we need to engage multi-stakeholders from farmers, community leaders to investor and policymakers, ensuring that there are alignment in their efforts. And somehow we also need to realize that the integrated actions is not only crucial for restoring natural resources and ecosystem services, but also improving human well-being and strengthening local economics at scale. So here we are also can from the slide I mentioned about how the integrated landscape finance can promote public and private investment, generate results across climate, biodiversity, landscape, and governance goals, and there also requires some enabling conditions. As mentioned. Let me just go back. Here, the importance of multi-stakeholder platform, landscape level planning and governance, and financing and policy instrument. So in the context of the PES, so PES become one of the piece of the broader, more dynamic landscape finance strategy. In the case of the Philippines, for sure that you have faced, as well as in Indonesia, my country, how the climate vulnerable production landscape, which require more than isolated projects. So in the case of integrated landscape investment portfolio, we need to somehow combine public, private, and blended instrument across the entire landscape. So in this slide, you can see that there are various approaches that we can try to connect within a landscape. For example, green bonds can support the forest protection, reforestation in upper watershed. There should be also payment for watershed services, as we discussed today, compensate upland farmers for agroforestry, for the productions of the good commodities within a healthy landscape, as well as somehow sustain water supply for the downstream beneficiaries. There are also instruments such as ecological fiscal transfer that I will somehow slightly discuss in this presentation, rewarding the local government that provide ecosystem services aligned with the national sustainability goals. From the commodity perspective, we need also to link with the sustainability certification, for example, that enable farmers to access premium markets. There are also instruments such as microloans, CSR, the corporate sustainable social responsibility investment that may bridge the financing gaps from smallholders in a productive landscape, transitioning to the green practices. Most importantly, since in many cases, enabling conditions are still lacking, especially the data and as well as evidence-based portfolio, grants as part of the blended financing remain essential to build institutional foundations, the governance platform, for example, planning, capacity building, and innovation. So as we can see here that payment for ecosystem services and watershed services in this case, it will play a critical part of the system. So in the case of scaling P-WES and sustain the landscape transformations, again, that I would recommend about integrating this scheme into a broader financing architecture, as we can see in this slide. And here from this slide, well, it's coming back. Okay. There are diverse private, public, and civil society actors that may support the generations and channeling of funding for the system of integrated landscape finance. So these slides show the variety of actors, as you can see here, that engage in this financing system. You can list all the interconnected ministries from forestry, agriculture, finance. Even in Indonesian's case, we also involve the internal affairs ministry. And the existence of a multi-stakeholder forum, as we experience in many countries, is beneficial, especially to coordinate as the coordinating points and facilitator of the process. So here what we can learn as well, that the needs of environmental fund institutions that have flexibility, and especially the most important ones, the legality to source, invest, and distribute the result-based payment, are very critical, especially when we are applying what's so-called this integrated landscape financing system. For the next slide, I would just very quickly touching base of some lessons from Indonesia, the case study that we did in one of the landscape in East Java. I may just quickly skip this slide because I know that many experts on P-WES in this forum, but just slightly remind you how P-WES has been evolved since 2000, where the first time many pilots in Asia and many other countries are being conducted. Yeah, with EC4 we compiled the P-WES lessons in this book. So you may visit our website and download the book. It somehow describes many cases of P-WES from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, including our lessons learned as the reflections of the pilots. I may also just quickly discuss this. I would like to highlight that somehow there are significant efforts in facilitations and negotiations when we target to finalize a P-WES agreement. Yeah, many of you may have experienced the difficulties and challenges to ensure that a P-WES to be implemented on the ground. And beyond the science-based evidence-based information that we prepare for designing a P-WES, I also somehow would like to emphasize about the importance of reciprocity and trust building when we are talking about developing a P-WES for its implementation. And there are also some emphasis in how the P-WES as a co-benefits. It may not the only sources of revenue to ensure that the farmers, smallholder, they are continuously adopt the good and also sustainable practices to ensure the ecosystem service being produced. There should be some many other channels as we discussed in the slides of integrated landscape finance. Yeah, you may also have been very familiar with this slide. Yeah, there are some stages that we conducted when we design a P-WES, from scoping, implementation of a contract. The most important one is monitoring and evaluation, since this is a performance-based mechanism. And the most important one, to upscale. As we know that somehow in the small plots or the certain landscape, it will not meaningfully provide the ecosystem services to the beneficiaries. There are also roles of the government that somehow being discussed in many cases, coming from providing enabling policy and regulations up to targeting development, and the most importantly, how they also can provide conditional fiscal transfer in the case that a P-WES is beyond on the landscape, but also involving jurisdictions. There are also important parts of the P-WES about the investor, yeah, how different investor from donor, philanthropists, as well as the government fund, impact fund, that somehow becoming pillars for the P-WES agreements and payment. So in Indonesia, we have quite advanced, if I can say, that somehow payment for ecosystem services has been mentioned as part of our economic instrument for environmental restorations and management. There are laws and as well as PPEs means presidential regulation, and also ministerial regulations that somehow making sure that PES is become parts of important financing scheme for climate and forest. So let me just very quickly going through this slide. So this is our case study in watershed, one of the watershed in East Java. The watershed is locates in here. Yeah, you can see it's a small dots in East Java, Indonesia. Why we choose this to work here? Because this watershed is very critical and very degraded. Well, they are very high demand of the water coming from this watershed, especially there are lots of industries in the downstream, and this work is in the collaborations with the Danone, since they are having what's so-called the water bottle company, the largest water bottle company in Indonesia. So within this study, we have done scientific assessment, especially on life, land use, the livelihood of the local community. We are also conducting a landscape analysis, ecosystem service trade-offs, including ecosystem service quantifications, watershed functions, and even more importantly, also the water use efficiency. And in the case of the community facilitations, we ensure that there are behavior changes, not only from ecosystem service providers who are the smallholders in this landscape, but also the buyers, the potential buyers in a downstream area, and including farmers who become the beneficiary of the water, who are managing their paddy field, irrigated paddy field, who really require lots of water coming from the watershed. And to some extent, we would like to improve and then prove how the science can become actions in the case of integrated watershed management and become the basis of negotiated change, awareness, behavior, and co-investment in watershed protection. So this is how the landscape looks like. First of all, we define the landscape into three important parts: the upstream, midstream, and downstream. You can see that there are lots of different land use in this case, different farming practices from natural forest, agroforestry, annual crops in the upstream area. There are problems with unsustainable farming practices as well as severe watershed problems, decreasing infiltration rate and landslide and soil erosion. So this is the how we designed the project. There are two phases of this project. The phase one targets the restorations in the upstream, and then the second phase is to ensure that there are integrated watershed management. It's the reducing the water demand in the downstream, because as we know, talking about the water balance, we not only have to improve the supply, but also understand how to make the demand more efficient and more responsible. So since in the downstream, as mentioned, there are many industries, including the Danone water bottle company, as well as irrigated paddy field as managed by smallholder. So this is how the upstream landscape looks like. There are quite diverse landscape in the area, starting from the annual crops. There are agroforestry in the middle, as well as in the downstream irrigated water company as the irrigated paddy field. So you can see the complexity of the landscape. While on the other hand, there are also some different socioeconomic conditions of the farmer. So in the beginning of the assessment, we conduct what's so-called the clustering. by understanding the landscape with different types of socioeconomic and also environmental condition. This is what we do within the what's so-called the Radyoso Kita. This is the name of the project. We conducted the scientific-based, evidence-based approach, understanding the characteristic and conceptual model of the aquifer, conducting awareness raising, as well as the facilitations and on the PES for the local community, conducting many ecosystem service measurement plots, including water infiltration, measuring the sedimentation rate, and also measuring the carbon stock. During the pilot of ecosystem service payment, so we do also what's called the reverse auction. This is to ensure that there are the willingness to accept understood coming from the preference of the smallholders in joining the PES. And we pilot PES in 12 groups of farmers in 7 villages. And to ensure that they are strong intermediary, we work with the watershed forum in the district level, doing some institutional capacity building as well as awareness raising on the concept. So this is the very briefly about the result. Yeah. So you can see here the numbers. Those are the calculations of measurement of the impacts of the intervention coming from the reduced soil loss up to the rates of infiltration, including the measurement of the revenue and efficiency. Just very quickly to see to show you our research work. In designing the PES, indeed that it is important to map the watershed with more quite complete and refined informations of the land use and farming practices. We identified what are the drivers of the changes and what will be the land cover changes happening in the landscape. We also conducted the landscape and socioeconomic characteristic coming from the livelihood sources, dominant land use, income, what the status of the arable land, what type of indigenous people living in the landscape, what problem that they face in the case of the water and source of water that they obtain for their livelihood. This is, you can see that there are a couple of pilots that we conducted in different parts of the landscape. And we are also seeking type of the local knowledge and their conservation technique to ensure that the payment for the ecosystem service providers can somehow conduct good practices within their knowledge. These are the flow of work, yeah, from how we can we do the PES coming from scoping up to the periodic monitoring. Yeah, these are, you can see how we put simple measure of water PES monitoring, and a bit small, yeah, on the right you can see the dots of where our monitoring station within the landscape. We also conducted modeling at different sub-watershed. And this is like one of the example, what happens if we upscale the PES, how much it will somehow influence the ecosystem services. As well as with the carbon stock. Yeah, here the carbon stock we see different land and farming practices. And also measuring the impact of the PES for not only for the water, but also for the carbon. So, and then just quickly to brief you about the second phase of this project, where we try to understand where exactly the catchment area, and then to ensure that any interventions in the upstream can increase the water flowing to the downstream. Yeah. And then within the downstream, we ensure that there are efficient groundwater use. And also we would like to ensure that somehow when we emphasize on efficiency of ground use, but we also can increase the paddy productivity and farmers' income. We do similarly, we do also the selections and then also typology and clustering. And we, in collaborations with the private company, we also provide them with a proper design of artesian well, yeah, to ensure that they have a good wells construction, yeah, that somehow increase their water efficiency use. We conduct some survey with the local community, and including the mapping, irrigation mapping, as well as the land cover map, and using a very refined image. And this is the mapping. You can see that we also conducted a participatory one with the local farmers there. And we conducted the demonstration plots, yeah, including planting pattern, how to manage the water, fertilizer applications, and also applications of pest and disease control. These are a couple of assessment that we have done. You know, we somehow assess the revenue, the cost, the yield, and emissions of two types of the farming practices: the sustainable paddy cultivation one that ensure good, efficient water use from the paddy cultivation, as well as the conventional one. So you can see here that somehow the sustainable paddy cultivation, when managed well, it can provide good revenue, although the cost is higher for the farmer, yeah, but it's really compensated by the revenue as well as the yield and the quality of the paddy. And we also here can see that how the SPC somehow having reduced emissions compared to the conventional ones. And within this approach, we are also analyzing about the value chains, yeah, of these paddy to ensure that somehow when we are talking about the sustainable paddy cultivations, we are not only asking them to reduce and change their behavior towards a better water use management, but also receive supports needed, not only in the case of the facilitations, but also access to good, better off-taker, as well as to promote and their what's called the healthy rice coming from the practice. Okay, that's just shortly to provide you the comprehensive P-WES, the payment for watershed services, targeting both upstream and downstream of the watershed as part of the integrated watershed services. And I would like also to touch base a bit what's called the ecological fiscal transfer, because somehow, as we can see, that P-WES stay in the very isolated and plot level. So, however, when we're talking about a larger scale of P-WES, it might also thinking about the jurisdictional scale, where somehow one jurisdiction can act as ecosystem service providers, providing benefits for other jurisdictions as the beneficiaries for ecosystem services. So in this case, we are talking the P-WES not only at the transfer revenue between the private sector or the company to the smallholders, but also a transfer of public revenue between governments within a country based on ecological indicators that somehow, if you're talking about watershed function, indeed it needs to be adjusted or relevant for the watershed ecosystem service provision. Just a bit on the EFT. So this is EFT, a share of intergovernmental fiscal transfer and revenue sharing scheme according to ecological indicators such as protected area or watershed management areas. Yeah, it has been somehow being applied in many countries, as you can see in this literature. And EFT, it can be from the national to province, province to district, and even in our case, it's district to the villages where the real work are being conducted. So within Indonesia, there has been a couple of regulations, mostly are still at the subnational level. And somehow it supports the EFT to be continued coming and also upscale. One of the province, for example, in North Kalimantan, they have defined some performance indicator for the provincial EFT and also being regulated by the government regulations. It's including forest fire land restoration, green open space, waste management, watershed protections, and air pollution. And we are also practicing and piloting EFT in one of our site in South Sulawesi, that somehow when we are discussing of this EFT, this really requires good facilitations at the jurisdictional level, and also ensure that the affiliates where the EFT are being targeted somehow being get some good indicators that contextual to their affiliates or farmer groups requirement, including how the watershed services are also being become one of the indicators, in addition to any farming practices that somehow proposed by the local farmers and the village. These are, for example, the criteria and indicators that discussed within the pilots project with the local government to ensure that the EFT indicators are somehow contextualized to the jurisdiction. Some lessons that maybe you can, I will share this to you so you can somehow see in more refined version. My last slide about the lessons learned. So somehow when we are talking about the landscape finance, including the payment for watershed services as part of the landscape, it really requires a well-coordinated design in the beginning. So the role of science, us especially as the scientists, in assessing spatial configuration, understanding the ecosystem service, identifying socioeconomic context, including the profitability, the transaction costs, and as well as how the governance work are really critical in the case of designing integrated landscape finance. And coming from upscaling, it means that targeting only a single instrument may not be sufficient. So we require a multi and innovative financing as part of the landscape financing efforts. And the last one, so we somehow needs to understand that the integrated landscape finance needs to address innovations in institutional and financial system, and somehow that it's still required enabling conditions, not only from the scientific part, but also foreign policy actions to ensure that they are diversified landscape investment portfolio. Okay, I guess that's all from me, and thank you for your attention.
Okay, so thank you so much for that insightful presentation, Dr. Lemona. The idea of payment for ecosystem services contributing to climate resilience is indeed P-WES can shift from being a short-term financial mechanism to a long-term resilience strategy. And aligning or thinking about sustainable development goals, P-WES aligns with climate action, life on land, clean water, and poverty reduction. Okay, for our audience who have questions for Dr. Lemona, please type them in the chat box, or you can hold your questions until our open forum after the photo opportunity. Okay, live count update. So we now have more than 80 participants. Okay. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so let us now have our photo opportunity. We would like to invite everyone to kindly turn on their cameras for a quick photo opportunity. And then please hold your smiles as we take photos. This may take a while, no, since we have quite a few panels to go through, okay? Turn on your cameras, please.
Okay po, let's take your photos po. Show your best smile. Okay, 1, 2, 3 for the panel 1. Smile po. Okay, next panel po. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Smile po. Next panel po. 1, 2, 3. Smile po. And last one po. 1, 2, 3. Smile po. Okay po, thank you everyone.
Okay, thank you for giving us your smiles, your best smiles. Okay, so it's time for our open forum. You are all invited to actively participate. So please feel free to raise your hands virtually, or you can type your questions directly into our chat box. And also we have Q&A tab. You may also type your questions there. And moderating the open forum would be Dr. Canesio Predo, project staff as well of the P-WES Advocacy Project from the UPLB-INREM. I'm sure you have questions for our first speaker, so let us move to our open forum. So Dr. Predo is an economist and revered professor at the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, UPLB. Dr. Predo?
Thank you, Ma'am Check. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Limuna, for accepting the invitation for INREM for this seminar and sharing your experiences, very wide experience in PAS, and I'm happy to meet you here again on Zoom, as we have been meeting before through the FC projects. Also, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our other experts on PAS, Dr. Herminia Francisco, and also our supporter, Honorable Beloso, who is all I found it in Zoom. So those who are going to ask questions, please indicate your institutions. You can write your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A, and I will repeat your or state your questions to Dr. Lee. So, hi, Lee. So, anyone would like to start the question, first question? Okay, I have seen one from the Zoom chat. May I see if I could read it? From Maria P. Castillo. The question is, let me see if I can read it here. She is affiliated on the OFW. She is an OFW from Saudi Arabia. So maybe she's very interested to have this PAS also. So the question is, I have encountered about permaculture. What is your take on this when it comes to sustainability and climate change? So do you have any idea, Lee, for this?
I'm not sure I'm an expert on permaculture.
Yeah.
Uh,
So not so related to PAS, right? Any other? Maybe I could ask another one. Maybe I'll ask you because I'm a fan of your work also. So very interesting to learn from your experience and your case studies, and you have also discussed about the ecological fiscal transfer. So, how this when do we decide when we use PES or this ecological fiscal transfer? I'm not so familiar about EFT, so can you please give us more insight on this? Thank you, Lee.
Yes, thank you, Ganesio, on your question. So basically, this ecological fiscal transfer, trying to link the PS, happens when as we know that somehow there are some subnational jurisdictions such as district or province. Well, province maybe is a bit too big, yeah, like districts or maybe villages that somehow become the upstream area of the other jurisdictions. Yeah, like for example, in Indonesia, there are two districts where the first district is where their springs and protected area are located. And I guess it's also happened, I guess, in Manila as well, right? You have another district that somehow the catchment area are located. So in this case, we are in Indonesia. We somehow within the regulations of environmental and forest and environment regulation, we somehow define and differentiate between the PES that somehow works between private to private with the government to government. In this case, that we are using the concept of ecological fiscal transfer as part of the G2G payment for watershed services. So that's how the idea came from. And the ecological fiscal transfer itself, somehow it doesn't add what to say, it doesn't really add new revenue for the it doesn't really provide additional cost, yeah, for the government who becomes the beneficiaries, but somehow it reallocates the financing financial instrument that they have, and then the revenue they have in the district. Like for example, when providing some what to say, money, it somehow provide a green earmarking rather than adding cost to the system. So that's how it works. And fortunately, within in Indonesia, there are a couple of financing instrument, the fiscal instrument that can be done. Like for example, there is what's so called the grants, yeah, or well, kind of donation, but I don't know how to translate it in English. But there is a fiscal instrument that allows a certain government, like a district, giving grants to the other district. Yeah, so this instrument that somehow we add ecological indicators to such fiscal instrument rather than having a new instrument or yeah, a new way to transfer the money. So that would be the most effective one so far, yeah. Since with, as you know, that we're talking about the fiscal instrument, it will require a very long approval, yeah, if we somehow initiate something new. So we make sure that two things: ecological indicators are attached into certain transfer, and then the second one, using the most probable and feasible existing instrument that only well, that's not only require political willingness coming from the jurisdictions that become the beneficiary.
Okay, so thank you very much, Lee, for that very comprehensive answer. I can now imagine that here in the Philippines we have one municipality which is not part of the watershed who's supplying ecosystem service sample water to another area. Maybe that EFT can be used. No, so thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So another question from the chat box. Let me see if I can read it from the Zoom chat. From anonymous person. Given the complexity of local governance and the diverse land tenure livelihood characteristics in the Philippines, what are your key recommendations for establishing and maintaining this reciprocity and trust building across diverse stakeholders groups, for example, local communities, the water users, government agencies, and so on, to finalize a binding PAS agreement? That's the question.
Yes, for me, first of all, this evidence base is very important. Yeah, like for example, I just reflecting my case in Indonesia. So in many cases, the catchment area is inside. I mean, it become like the boundary of this catchment area can have two different land status, right? Like 50% inside the protected area managed by the national government, 30% are inside forest management unit under the provincial government, and then the rest may be private sector, private land managers, right? And when we are discussing such complex landscape, indeed, it's important to define where the catchment area, and then which area that require restorations or maintenance to ensure that the ecosystem services are being provided in such landscape. Having that would be a very strong media for negotiation, what I can say. Yeah, without any clear boundary on who responsible to do what, that would be kind of a challenge. Then after such a strong evidence base being provided, indeed that 80% of the PS is about the facilitations and negotiation. Yeah, I mean, many complaints to me why PS doesn't work. I said that because there are nobody that really being there, yeah, facilitating all the process. And then, as you know, that here we are talking about multi-stakeholders, especially in the complex landscape I mentioned earlier. So we need to talk to the provincial, to the national government, to the forest department who manage the forest, to the province, to the smallholders, to the to various level of the layers of small local community as well. So yeah, talking about the PS is not 1 or 2 year works, right? Minimum is 3 to 5 years to make it happen. That's why, I mean, it's complex, but I guess it's worthwhile, because when we clarify those things, then we can be integrated watershed management with performance-based can be somehow realized.
Okay, thank you very much, Lee. So more questions are coming. So the question from our very popular FC mentor, Dr. Hermie Francisco. Her question to you is, hi Lee, how widespread is the practice of PAS for watershed management in Indonesia? Is the most prevalent scheme who pays for the PAS? Is the I think it's sorry, it's another one. So the question is it's not clear here. So in the most is the most prevalent scheme who pays for the PAS? That's the question. So who pays in most prevalent scheme who pays for the PAS in Indonesia?
Yes, so with the regulations on the PS being published, so hopefully we are somehow diversified the beneficiaries. Somehow currently indeed that there are direct PS what to say, it's classic PS, like what I presented in my presentations, is the private sector who use the water. Those are still the very prevalent one in the current situation. But as we know that somehow the revenue coming from the PS is not enough, right? So that's why we try to combine a different approach, including like, for example, how to ensure, like, for example, this corporate social responsibility can somehow also being parts of the PS become more performance-based rather than beyond only grants or small donations for the local community. Yeah, we try to link many financing instruments to the PS itself, although now the most direct one coming from the private sector who really become the user of the water. That would be one thing. And then the second one, as I mentioned in my presentations, how to link the government program to be more greener, and then also concern about targeting program, development program, agriculture, sanitation, as well as education for the ecosystem service providers. Yeah, so and there are another layer of the support for the local community. And in addition to that, we are also working on the green commodities. Yeah, how, like for example, when ecosystem service provider are entitled for the PES, somehow we are also facilitating like the agroforestry, and then what type of products, how to make sure that they are added value coming the agroforestry that become the parts of the PES. Yeah, it's also happening for the watershed management in the downstream.
Okay, thank you, Lee, for that response. So I skipped one question, but I will go back to that. From Jeffrey Losloso of UPLB-INREM. His question is about what co-investment or integrated livelihood mechanisms were explored to ensure that the benefits of the PA scheme reach the most marginalized upstream households who may not own critical land, thereby strengthening collection action and social inclusivity.
Thank you. Interesting question. And I know Pagula, Stefano Pagula will have lots of also opinion on this. I would say that this is kind of also some debates whether PES is for the poorest of the poor, right? There are a couple of debates on that issue. However, what I can say that if we are talking about direct PES, the small scale one within the private company to the small certain group of the farmers, indeed that it's kind of difficult to target the marginalized upstream household, right? However, if we are talking about the previous scheme that we have discussed about the jurisdictional approach, right, the ecological fiscal transfer, which a larger scale, then this might be able to be targeted better, I would say. So it means that upscaling the PS and seeing it as, again, as an integrated landscape financing instrument that will be become more feasible to target at such a developmental issue and also marginalized upstream community. Maybe that would be my short answer for now.
Yeah, so interesting. Maybe this is the last question for you, Lee, and then the question is about we have a struggle here in the Philippines to implement or institutionalize PAS because we need to have an ordinance or a policy which is at a legislation level. But in Indonesia, what is your experience? Do you need a law to implement PAS or the EFT, for example?
Well, look, I can say that that regulation, although, well, it really required in the case that we know that PE somehow is voluntary, right? However, what is voluntary, but still many of private sectors, they are questioned like, okay, we want to contribute to this, but are you sure that this is kind of legal to be implemented in the country, right? Although it's voluntary. So having that umbrella is quite critical in that case to upscale the PES to some extent. And within the Indonesian regulation, there are two parts. They somehow regulate two parts. The first part is about the PS scheme itself. And then the second part, they are talking about system of payment for ecosystem services. So that somehow it enables to mainstream the PS within the various financing instrument in Indonesia. So yeah, well, it's still ongoing, but that would be the direction. Having monitoring and evaluations of the PS itself within the system of PS. So that would be the trends that coming in Indonesia.
Okay, thank you so much, Lee. So we are on time, and then there are so many other questions, but maybe we can give the questions to you if you have time to answer them. Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing your experiences. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Back to you, Ma'am Check.
Okay, so all the questions have been answered except for few questions which we will try to address later. So thank you once again, Dr. Lemona and Dr. Fredo. Okay, so that's just one presentation. And we have more insightful presentation and discussions ahead of us this afternoon. So our next speaker has been cited by researchers all over the world for his contribution in the field of payment for ecosystem services. Dr. Stefano Pagiola is a senior environmental economist in the World Bank's Environment Department. He leads the bank's work on payments for environmental services. Work on payments for environmental services. He has worked extensively on economic valuation of environmental and natural resource problems, with particular emphasis on land degradation, ecosystem services, and biodiversity conservation. He joined the World Bank as a young professional in 1994. Before joining the bank, he taught economics at Stanford University and was a research associate at Washington State University. He holds a PhD and master's degree from Stanford University and a bachelor's degree from Princeton University. His recent publications include a volume of case studies of market-based mechanisms for forest conservation and selling forest environmental services. So we're excited to introduce one of the forerunners of P-WES, Dr. Stefano Pagiola.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I hope you can all hear me well. And let me share my screen. Okay. Good morning. I'm here in Washington, where it's very early in the morning and also very cold. So there's many reasons I would very much prefer to be in the Philippines right now, especially because this kind of presentation is always I find more profitable on a face-to-face basis. But the good thing about this kind of technology, at least it lets us reach a very wide range of people, which is a big plus. So today I want to talk a bit about payments for watershed ecosystem services and bring some lessons from experience around the world. This is an instrument that's been used a lot, especially in Latin America, so we have quite a bit of accumulated experience at applying it. Is it? Okay, here we go. So I'm going to start by quickly going over the logic of P-WES. I understand that this is the last webinar in a series, so some of what I'm going to say is probably going to be things you've heard before if you've sat through all of the webinars in this series. But I find it's often useful to go back to first principles, take a step back, and go through the logic, because it helps us understand what kinds of things are needed to make this work in the ground. So I'll go through that, some examples of how it's been applied, and again, what that means for what needs to happen, and some lessons learned, and then talk a bit about how this might be applied more extensively in the Philippines. So to begin with, it's important to remember that P-WES is a tool. It's not an end in itself. It's a tool to solve problems. And as Dr. Lemona emphasized in her presentation, it's only one of many tools. It's not a silver bullet that will solve everything. It's one tool aimed at very specific sort of problems. And it's important to see it in that way. And so I always find it useful to start by talking about the kinds of problems that PES is meant to solve. And one of these is the problem of water storage. Water storage is incredibly useful, especially in Asia, where there's such a distinction between wet and dry seasons. With very wet, rainy seasons, very dry seasons in between. But water use happens all year round, and you need to redistribute the water from when it falls to when it is most useful. And so water storage is critical for this. It's also critical. So it's critical for making water available for uses such as irrigation, hydroelectric power generation, domestic consumption, and to avoid the peak flows that can cause flooding during the wet season. And as climate change threatens to make rainfall even more intense and erratic, storage becomes increasingly important. But the Philippines has very little water storage compared to its peers. You can see some of the numbers there on the screen, dramatically less than some of its peers. And moreover, and this is where PES is going to come in, it's losing a lot of what it does have. And here's just one example, the Binga Dam in Luzon. You can see how the capacity of that dam has been gradually diminished by siltation. You can see the siltation happening in these pictures. And the current capacity is now something only a fifth of what it started out with. And in fact, by 2015, the dam was no longer operational. It's now been rehabilitated and it's back in operation, but that was a costly undertaking. And the reason that this siltation is happening is because of how degraded the watershed is. You can see the forest has been considerably cut down, and there's a lot of erosion in the areas that have been cleared. So this kind of degradation causes, I'm sorry, I want to get rid of this. This kind of degradation has both direct and indirect effects. There's a direct effect on infiltration and therefore on peak flows and on flood risk, as I mentioned earlier. There's also a longer term effect through erosion. Erosion is going to gradually reduce the capacity of reservoirs and therefore limit the availability of water in the dry season, and therefore limit all the water uses that depend on it, such as irrigation, hydroelectric power consumption, and domestic water supply. So there's a complex set of effects here. And so one might ask, why don't people conserve forests? Well, if we look at how forests are seen by society, forests bring local benefits, they bring hydrological benefits, and they also bring global benefits such as biodiversity conservation and carbon benefits. So forests, if you look at some of the many studies that have been made of the total economic value of studies, these always show very high values. But on the ground, the people who actually manage the forest, the households, the community groups, don't see all these benefits. What they see is only the local benefits. The other benefits are for other people. And so they quite understandably don't take them into account. And so when other alternative uses for the same land come in, such as cropping, these land uses often look much more attractive to them. And again, we're losing a lot of other benefits, but that's not something that affects them. And so they don't take it into consideration. In fact, if they were to conserve the forest, they would be worse off than they would have been if they had deforested. And so for them, this is a cost. There's an opportunity cost. And this is a well-known problem. There's been all kinds of approaches tried to develop it. A first step is always to try to remove perverse incentives. Often the alternative to forests are subsidized in many ways. And if we can get rid of that subsidies, we can reduce the incentives to deforest. And we can also often release quite substantial resources that could be used for other purposes. There's also many efforts that try to make forests themselves more attractive to local users. For example, through eco-certification, which gives them a price premium for forest products, or by introducing new income streams, such as by selling non-timber forest products or ecotourism. So all of these try to increase the benefits of the forests themselves, and often they can be quite successful. And when they work, that often is the easiest way to do things, because these are efforts that we can do with one-time, short-term projects. But they're not always sufficient. They may help, but they're not always sufficient. And not all forests have ecotourism potential. Not all forests produce non-timber forest products that can be commercialized. And even if they did, sometimes we cannot take advantage of that, because these are protected areas where such activities may not be allowed. So payments for environmental services or payments for ecosystem services tries to meet this directly. And the way it works is it tries to capture some of the benefits that some of the non-local benefits of forests and use them to finance direct payments to forest managers. And in that way, make forests be more profitable than the alternative. And this also leads to the question on, does this help poor farmers? To the extent that the people managing the forests are poor, they would be made better off by participating in such a program. So this is the definition of payments for environmental services that we use, which is very similar to the one that Dr. Lemona cited in her presentation. The key aspects of this definition is one, that the benefits, this is to generate benefits for others, right? This is to manage land in the way that generates benefits for people downstream or for the global community in the case of carbon sequestration and biodiversity conservation. It may also have other effects. It may also, as we just said, this also makes the forest managers themselves better off. But the main intention is to generate ecosystem services, as it says in the name. And the other aspect that's important is that these payments are conditional. These are performance-based payments. Unlike a lot of projects that we do in the rural space, where we provide an upfront support and then go home, here we don't provide upfront support, except in a few cases, which we can talk about. But rather we provide a payment upon completion. It's very similar to how we treat, for example, rice production, right? What we do is we pay the farmer once they produce the rice. And here we pay the farmer once they produce the clean water, or once they produce the flood risk reduction, or once they've sequestered the carbon. Okay. So let's look at some of the applications, the way it's been applied. The most common application is to conservation. And here I'm showing you the same diagram that I showed you before about the comparison of benefits from forest and non-forest land use, but I'm showing it over time, right? So forests would generate some amount of benefit to the forest manager, to the local household, to the community, mainly in terms of fuel wood, some timber, perhaps some fruit and other non-timber forest products. They're often not very large benefits. And so non-forest land uses such as crops are often provide much higher benefit to that landholder than the forest would. And so clearly there's a big opportunity cost that the farmers would give up if they were to keep the forest, and understandably, most of them are not disposed to do that. And PES tries to solve that by giving them a payment that is higher than that opportunity cost, which makes the landholder better off. And so I say this is the most common, even though the famous Costa Rica PSA program, most of it takes this form. Mexico's PES program called PRONAFOR was also solely concerned with conservation. And this can be quite effective. Here's some results from Uganda. You can see that this is a very high deforestation area, right? The The control group lost almost 10% of its forest cover in 3 years. Like, this is an extraordinarily high rate of deforestation. And the PES program that was offered in that area cut that deforestation rate in half. It didn't entirely eliminate it, but it reduced it by half, which is a very substantial impact. But let's go back again to first principles. If you look at this diagram, the question is, what happens when you stop payment? Well, the way this works is that it's the payment that makes the forest more attractive. If you stop making the payment, the forest goes back to being less attractive than it had been, and suddenly people are going to deforest again. There should be no expectation that PES has a lasting impact on conservation once payments end. That's simply not how it works. If we want PES to conserve forests, these payments need to be made indefinitely. And that's a very important conclusion. It has very important implications for how we finance PES. For example, we cannot finance it from a bank, a loan from the World Bank, which only lasts 5 years. We cannot finance it with a grant from GEF, which typically also only lasts 5 years. We really need a long-term, ongoing funding source if we are to use PES for conservation. And again, if we go back to our example of Uganda, we saw there was a very strong impact on deforestation while payments lasted. But as soon as payments ended, you can see that deforestation by the previous PES participants was indistinguishable from deforestation by those who had never received PES. And this is exactly what we should expect, right? This is not a flaw. This is just how the system works. Now, PES can also be used for restoration. Now, obviously, you should try to conserve forests where they're still there, but in many areas, we've already degraded forests quite substantially, and often we need to restore it. PES can help us do that. It's not the only thing that we can do for restoration, but it's one way. In this case, the non-forest land use is the current land use. And if we want to go back to forest, the returns look like that. Initially, there's obviously some investment involved in restoring the forest. We need to prepare the land, we need to buy seedlings, we need to plant them. But it's important then to realize that once we're back to forest, we're back to a land use that for the landholder is likely to be less profitable than the non-forest land use. So yes, we need to pay the investment costs to make this happen, but that's not enough. We also then need to complement that with something that offsets the opportunity cost. And this is a big mistake that reforestation programs around the world have done. They think that once they've planted the trees, the work is done. But there was a reason why the forest was cut down in the first place, and that reason is probably still active. And so it's not enough to cover the investment cost. We also need to provide a long-term payment for conservation. Once the forest is restored, we're back in the conservation world where we need to offset the opportunity cost. A slight variant of this is where we're using PES not to adopt forests, but to adopt sustainable land uses that bring at least some of the benefits of forests without being forests. For example, agroforestry or silvopastoral practices. These can often have much better hydrological characteristics than row crops. They can sequester more carbon as well. They have higher biodiversity. Obviously, they're not as good as forests would be on any of these dimensions, but they're much better than annual crops, and so they're often at least a halfway house, and they have the important characteristic that they can be in many cases more profitable than current land uses. But what happens is that they're not adopted because of the high initial cost of adopting this. Doing agroforestry, for example, involves planting a lot of trees. That's costly. Silvopastoral practices, again, involve planting a lot of trees, and that's costly. But because in the long term, these land uses are more profitable than row crops, you don't need to provide an ongoing payment. Once they're established, the farmers, the landholders will keep those land uses simply because they are more profitable. And so short-term support can be sufficient. So if you're doing forest restoration, you'll need long-term funding as you would need for conservation, but you actually need a lot more funding, especially in the short term, because you also have to cover the investment costs. Whereas if you're doing adoption of sustainable practices such as agroforestry, short-term funding is usually sufficient and will be less than what would be needed typically for forest restoration. So this is an important choice that needs to be made. Do we need to go for forest restoration, or can something like agroforestry be sufficient to address the problems that we're dealing with? Again, let me show you some results. This is a project we did using PES to induce adoption of silvopastoral practices in Colombia. You can see that before the project, there was some forest remnants, but basically the land uses in the pastures themselves are all fairly damaging land uses. Green is basically environmentally friendly land uses. Brown is damaging land uses. So overwhelmingly, the land uses were damaging before the project. After 4 years of PES, you can see that there was a fairly substantial land use change, a fairly substantial adoption of pastures with high tree densities, fodder banks, and other environmentally friendly land uses. And so PES here proved quite successful in inducing adoption, not in inducing adoption of forest. Remember, if we want people to replant forest, we need to provide a long-term payment, and this project was not offering that. So it's not surprising that we saw almost no change in forest area, even as we saw a big change in silvopastoral practices. But what I really wanted to show you here is what happened 4 years later. We went back 4 years later to see what had happened after payments ended. And here we found that the land uses that had been adopted thanks to the project, thanks to PES, had been essentially maintained. So again, this is because these are productive land uses that bring direct benefits to the farmers, as well as bringing some environmental services. So important to think about what we need to use PES for, and what that means for the funding requirements, and also for the organizational requirements, right? If you need to do long-term payments, you also need an organizational structure that does long-term payments. Whereas if you're doing something like adoption of sustainable practices, short-term funding is sufficient, and also the institutional structure to support it can be a short-term, like a project implementation unit, rather than a stable, long-lasting institution. This shows you various ways of financing PES. The sort of theoretical ideal PES is where the service users themselves are paying for the service, something like the water bottler that Dr. Lemona mentioned in her presentation. They're the ones who are getting the benefits, and so they should pay for the benefits they're getting to the service providers, who are the land users, the landholders. There's a lot of, this is not just a theoretical ideal. This is something that we have lots of examples around the world where this is happening. They tend to be very narrowly focused on one service, which is a service that the service user wants. And because everybody has strong incentives, they tend to be fairly efficient, but they also tend to be very small, and because of that, tend to have fairly high transaction costs. The alternative is government finance programs, such as Costa Rica's national program, Mexico's national program, state-level programs in many Brazilian states, for example. And here the payments are made not by the service users, but by the government or some other third party. These can often cover very large areas. There's about 3 million hectares covered by PES in Mexico, for example, and can also cover multiple EES and try to achieve other social objectives. They tend to be much less efficient, though. And so there's efforts to make hybrid program which try to leverage the benefits of both kinds. So steps to implementing PES, we always have to start by asking, is PES an appropriate solution to the problems that we're facing? Again, let's not try to do PES for PES's sake. This is saying we have a problem, a dam is being silted up, or irrigated rice farmers in the lowlands don't have enough water for irrigating in the dry season, or the water bottler, the quality of the water that they're receiving is poor. And what is the cause of that? And how can we deal with that? Only at that point can you decide if PES is appropriate. Then the steps are, there's a technical step of identifying what land uses we need to support, right? It's basically asking, what do we need landholders to do? That's not so obvious, right? And often there are trade-offs. We can do forest, which reduces erosion almost to zero, for example, or we can do some things like agroforestry, which reduces erosion by half, perhaps, less so than forest would have. And so we need to evaluate that trade-off. We then need to look at the payment arrangements. We need to be able to make payments to the farmers. Oops. We need to ask, how do we pay the landholders? How much do we pay them? Under what rules do we pay them? We need to obviously have the money to do all of that. So we need to develop financing sources. How do we get the service users to pay, either directly or indirectly? How much should they be paying? And we need to implement this and monitor that things are happening. Are the services actually being delivered? This is particularly important when it's direct payments from service users, because they will stop paying if they don't receive the services that they're paying for. And this is very similar to the steps that Dr. Lemona was talking about in her presentation earlier. So a few lessons. I'm going very fast here, and I apologize for that. I've done similar presentations over 3 days sometimes, because there's so much that we could go into. A few lessons here. First, you need to make clear that you understand what problems you're trying to solve, and why you care about them. Then almost always you need to target payments, and I'll show you why in a second. You need to often differentiate payments, because flat payments have been shown to be incredibly inefficient. In most cases, you need to provide long-term payments, which has very strong implications on the financing, as I mentioned, and on the organizational structure. And you need to make sure that you're actually doing what you're hoping to do, generating services. So you need to evaluate the impacts of this program. And typically, you need to continuously improve it. We're not smart enough to get this right from day one. There's going to be things that don't work. We need to improve things. But since this is an annual program that needs to last indefinitely, we need to continuously be working on how do we make it better. So let's talk a bit about targeting, because this is one of the very important lessons that have been learned through experience. Hydrological impacts, and here we're talking about watershed services, so PES used for watershed, so hydrological impacts are the critical thing we're worried about. Hydrological impacts are incredibly heterogeneous. This is a picture I took just a few months back in India, in the state of Sikkim. You can see these two rivers joining, and one of them is very clean, and the other one is very dirty. Carrying a whole lot of silt. So clearly, if we're going to do PES in these, we should target the watershed that the river that's carrying all the silt is coming from, and not the one that has very little silt, right? So It's very important to capture these, but it's not enough to just identify watersheds. Even within watersheds, we have a very high degree of heterogeneity. Here's some work we're doing right now in the Philippines. This is some preliminary results. We're doing 2 watersheds in northern Luzon. This is one of them, Santa Maria watershed in Ilocos Sur. And you can see this is a reforestation analysis we're doing, but we could do a similar one for deforestation, what would happen with loss of forest. But here we're focusing on reforestation. And you can see from the curve on the right that almost 50% of the possible emission, of the possible reduction in sediment comes from treating only about 4% of the watershed area. That's an incredibly small area. And you can see in the map where those areas are located. So if we are able to identify the areas that would most contribute to sediment reduction, if we were able to reforest them, we can have an incredibly high impact on sediment delivery and therefore on the problems we care about, such as siltation of reservoirs and so on. If we just randomly reforest anywhere in where there's no trees, we may have almost no impact because 90%, 95% of that watershed is in areas where reforestation would really not affect sediment delivery because of various factors, slope, distance from the river, and other reasons. So targeting is incredibly important. By proper targeting, we can increase the efficiency of the program. We can reduce its total cost. We're not necessarily reducing the per hectare cost. Some of these areas that we want to restore here may be quite costly to restore for various reasons. So the per hectare cost might well be higher, but the number of hectares is dramatically lower than if we don't do any targeting. And so the total cost of the program become much lower and the economics of it become much more attractive. It also means your logistical implementation arrangements become easier. You don't need to have the staff, the inputs, the vehicles to support reforesting thousands and thousands of hectares because you only need to reforest maybe 500 hectares. So that simplifies implementation. The cost of implementation is also lower from that dimension. And here you see the other thing you need to take into account in terms of targeting is the risk of deforestation. And here we're going back to conservation as an objective. Not all forests are threatened. Remember the diagram, the results from Colombia. Before the project, in this highly degraded area, about 20% of the land was still under forest. And it's often the case that even in highly degraded areas, some forests remain, either because they're useful to the local landholders, they get timber from them, fuel wood, and maybe they protect their local springs, so they have a local hydrological benefit, or maybe they are simply on land that is too steep, too rocky, too far from roads to be useful for agriculture. So some land will probably not be threatened. And if we don't take into account, we could be wasting a lot of money paying people to conserve forests that were not under threat. And you can see here in the results for Mexico's national P-WES program, at the overall national level, that program had no statistically significant impact on deforestation. That's the result you see on the left. But when it was applied in areas at high risk of deforestation, it reduced the deforestation rate quite substantially and in a statistically significant way. So if we can target the areas at high risk of deforestation, again, we'll be reducing our costs, both in terms of spending on payments and in terms of spending on implementation arrangements. So what do we need to do proper targeting? First of all, technical information on what land uses we need to support, at what locations to produce the environmental services that we want, and which and we need to know whether these land uses would in fact be adopted if we did nothing. In some cases they would, and so we don't need to bother. And we need to make sure that our analysis was right. Again, there may be a lot of sources of error, so we need to monitor this. And then we need to actually write the rules in a way to target the payments. And there's many ways we could do this. We could restrict the eligibility to participate to just those areas that we've identified. Some programs use point systems that give different amounts of points based on criteria such as slope or other factors that are critical for environmental service delivery, and then rank the applications and accept the highest ranked ones. We can differentiate prices to encourage participation where it's most valuable, offer higher payments in areas that are more important and lower payments elsewhere. And these are not mutually exclusive. We can do all of these things to various degrees. So let me now, so that the need for targeting is critical, and that's something that not all PES programs have yet taken on board. A lot of them have gone to the level of targeting particular areas, but there's not often been a lot of within watershed targeting, partly because until recently, we really didn't have the tools to do that, but now we do, so we should use them. Now, in terms of how would we do this in a country like the Philippines? It's important to remind here that there are two strategies we could be adopting. One is for a national program. Costa Rica, Mexico, a lot of Brazilian states such as Espírito Santo have national scale programs. And these, as I said earlier, these are very large scale, cover very large area. They can also focus on a variety of problems. They can take into consideration other social objectives. They're not very limited in that way. The key element that they need here is a stable funding source. You should not have a PS program that depends on annual allocations from the government budget, because every single year you may or may not get the money that you need. And if you need to do long-term payments, that's simply not a way you can run a PES program. So here you need a stable funding source. In the case of Costa Rica, for example, they receive 3.5% of state revenue from the fuel tax, plus 25% of revenues from water tariffs. And that's earmarked for PES. So they have a stable funding source, and they can continue to operate. The disadvantages of some of these state level programs is they're not always well adapted to local conditions. Again, think of the diversity of conditions in the Philippines. A single program would find it very hard to adapt itself to all of those. But it tends to have relatively low unit costs of implementation because it is so large. And it can rely on institutions of fairly high technical capacity, such as national forestry agencies, for example. The other strategy is one of local scale mechanisms. And there's been a couple of pilots a decade ago in the Philippines under a program called RUPES that basically follow this model. The example that Dr. Lemona presented is also along this model. And here we're focusing on a specific local problem, usually financed by a specific water user in that location. These tend to be very small. That scale is an advantage in terms of developing the program, because the ecosystem dynamics are often fairly simple. We're not talking huge watersheds with many things happening. We're often talking fairly small micro watersheds where it's easy to see what's happening. The number of stakeholders that we need to involve is often limited. Dr. Lemon again also mentioned this, the need to get everybody who's a stakeholder involved. And the more that number increases, the more complex it becomes. They can be well adapted to local conditions. And because every actor here has strong incentives, they can often be fairly efficient, but they do have relatively high units cost of implementation. And the agencies that need to develop them, such as LGUs or local water users, often have very limited technical capacity. And that's a big. Now, in terms of the Philippines, given the particular nature of the Philippines, with so many islands, each with their own characteristics, and even within the islands, they're split up into many different watersheds, which have different sets of problems, different sets of contexts, different agricological conditions. I think a national program would find it difficult to operate, and so a local scale mechanisms may be more attractive as an approach. Now, how could we overcome some of the limitations that I just mentioned here in terms of, for example, limited technical capacity to implement? One model that might be considered is that followed by Brazil's National Water Agency, ANA. They have a program called Water Producers, Produtores da Água. And if we go back to the steps that I talked about earlier, these different steps. For example, we need a number of technical analyses to be done, especially if we want to target the programs effectively. And local agencies, LGUs, local water users, whoever might be involved, often don't have the skills to do that, don't even know the questions to ask. And these things are not hugely costly, but they do involve a certain amount of costs upfront before anything happens. And so what ANA does is provide technical guidance on how to do the technical analysis and some financing for these upfront costs. And then, as we say, we need to design payment arrangements, we need to develop financing sources. And again, what ANA does is it doesn't actually do the work, but it provides guidance on how to do it. It provides templates that are broadly applicable to a range of conditions and can be adapted to local needs. So you still have a highly technically capable agency such as ANA providing support, but instead of using it to develop a nationwide program, they've used it to develop a program of assisting local actors who want to do programs. So I think this is an approach that is certainly worth considering in a country as diverse as the Philippines. So let me stop there just to say, in conclusion, we at the World Bank have a very long history of supporting PES. So you can see some of the countries that we've, the countries that we've supported in. Philippines is not yet on this map. Maybe it will be at some point in the future. We've been doing work on PES since 1998, so it's been over a quarter century now, with a big focus on implementation, on actually doing things. There's been a lot of actors who have talked about PES. We've actually done PES in over 20 completed projects. There's quite a few projects under implementation right now. There's also carbon projects, which are a form of PES, and many more under implementation. PES programs that we have supported in the past are currently spending over $100 million a year on forest conservation and have over 3 million hectares under conservation contracts. Again, this is not bank finance, right? In fact, if you look at the form that World Bank support has taken to PES, it's mostly been technical assistance, helping countries figure out if PES is the right thing to do, how to design a program, how to develop financing, how to do all the steps that we talked about, and supporting them in that process. Some financing for short-term PES or transitional financing to help start off things while national sources of long-term funding come in. But basically, our assistance has been primarily technical rather than financial. We've also spent a lot of time documenting the lessons of what we've done. We have a working paper series, which is available on the World Bank website. We've also published a very large number of peer-reviewed papers. And I think that QR code should give you a link to download most of those, but sometimes these QR codes no longer work after a period of time. So hopefully it still works. If not, I'll provide a new link that the organizers can share. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the questions and the discussion.
Alright. Thank you, Dr. Pagiola. And it's interesting to
I'm sorry, Dr. Rosario, I cannot hear you.
lessons from explaining to being the hello. Hello.
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. So thank you for the very informative and thought-provoking presentation, Dr. Pagiola. And it's interesting to know the lessons from experiences worldwide, particularly the World Bank. And also interesting to know that World Bank had been documenting their experiences and lessons for many years, no? And realizing that using PES for adoption of environmentally friendly productive practices can actually have lasting results. So with Dr. Pagiola's perspective, we look into PES through the global lens. Now we contextualize the learnings in the Philippine setting and look into the future of PES in the country. Our discussant is among the few names in the Philippines people think of anytime PES is mentioned. Dr. Marian de Los Angeles is currently the chairperson of the Board of the Resources, Environment, and Economic Center for Studies, or RICS. She brings in more than 30 years of experience in natural resource and environmental economics for development policy, particularly on instruments for conservation, financing, payments for ecosystem services, wealth accounting, and valuation of ecosystem services for decision-making, extended or social benefit cost analysis, impact analysis, and capacity building. She has worked with various Philippine national government agencies, non-government organizations, academic institutions, and development agencies. To reach these presentations with the local perspective, it's my pleasure to give the virtual floor to Dr. Marian de Los Angeles and enrich more our discussions on PES. Dr. Marian.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pagiola, Stefano, for the review of the framework principles and the nuts and bolts of actually implementing PES in different settings. I'm sure we continue to learn from these. My discussion will focus on what I think we could do as next steps. And the first major step I think we should implement, and particularly through the P-WES, is to do a retrospective analysis of what pilot PES we have in with small effort to some extent, with specific instruments, and also to include those that are more long term, and this is the one in the Cagayan de Oro River Basin, where a number of us have pitched in at one time or another, including Stefano during our review a long time ago. That particular watershed where you have two mountains, Kitkat, became important because of the large disaster that happened, and that galvanized multi-sectoral approach to rehabilitating the mountains therein. But while there were several instruments that were started, and some amount has been provided to the paid to the upland providers, including indigenous peoples, the holder of the fund has mentioned to me recently that still the amount generated is not sufficient to really consider targeted rehabilitation of the watersheds of the two mountains. And this is despite the fact that there had been foreign assistance that had already been expended, some of which had benefited local governments in the form of tree plantations that are now providing forest recreation services. But it is really time to see where there is still a need to refine. Local water districts have paid or contributed, but not all of the local water districts have contributed. There is also some certification of good crops, sustainably managed crops, like the rice or the rice in quotation marks, adlay, and also there's a good cacao crop growing there now. But there are still gaps. And I think we've looked at the maps 3 years ago, and the gaps are still considerable. And so I shudder at every time there's a strong typhoon coming up, lest the Sendong massive flooding incident happen again, because the watersheds are still not that well maintained. There's also creeping urbanization in that area, and that drives me to the points that need to be tackled during the review of experiences in attempts at PES. There was mention, of course, at looking at the supply of ecosystem services, the users and the beneficiaries' actual or potential of ecosystem services, for which some payment instruments had been developed. But we have not really done a thorough analysis. We, in the research community, such thorough analysis should look at the landscape integrated, the interactions among the different ecosystems in the watersheds, should look at multiple use landscapes, and should look at whether the drivers that were addressed in the past still remain as the same drivers, or whether there are emerging drivers that are now dominating these watersheds, i.e. the pressures have changed, which could mean that some of the early gains of some PES are now dwindling. What that means too is we have not done our work, I think, in looking at monitoring and evaluation. And the research community should really lead here. And I hope that INREM will do so. The other component of such a review would be to look at the institutions. We don't have as strong institutions as the Latin American countries have. Our institutions are rather weak, and I'm not talking only about LGUs, I'm talking also about government institutions. There is a multiplicity of government institutions in watersheds. There's NIA, Irrigation Administration, NAPOCOR, of course, DNR, and then you have the Indigenous Peoples Council. So any PES should have coordinated effort from these where necessary. And that definitely is not happening. There is also another set of other sets of players that we need to be mindful about, and that is those that degrade the upland areas, and these include the mining communities. We have considerable mining going on, and they are not only changing the landscape, they are also drawing considerable groundwater from those mountains, and that definitely factors in respect to water as an ecosystem service for consumption or for non-consumptive uses. Are they paying for this water? Definitely not. The recent Philippine Statistical Authority assessment of water resources at the national level shows that self-produced and self-consumed water by institutions like by private users like the miners and the butlers and other companies don't pay. They are not metered. Our national, our local water districts don't meter or are not properly measuring the use of groundwater. And so that's free natural resource. And that should be part of a scheme for payment for ecosystem service. There are opportunities for some sectoral, intersectoral transfers. I was talking about mining. The miners pay considerable taxes, excise taxes, and a big part of those excise taxes go to the local government units. Another part goes to indigenous peoples, royalties when they are present in those areas. We have not really traced what happens to those revenues. Those revenues could be used for P-WES instruments. So we need to look into that as well. We also have the problem of subsidies and in the form of no payments made by irrigators for water used for irrigation. We used to have irrigation fees some time ago, but one president who wanted to be populist, made this free. So it will be a bit difficult to return or revive irrigation fees unless there is really improvement in performance of water supplied for irrigated land. So let's do that review, and let's do it thoroughly. Let's do it in a concerted manner, and let's do it quickly. That review should not cover only P-WES forms of pilot action research. It should also include government's effort to rehabilitate our forest areas. And I'm talking now about the NGP. It's a big funded program, funded by the government, by taxpayers like us. And there is an ongoing assessment where we should try to find out whether the NGP in various forms have really helped restore the forest, and therefore there's a promise of improved ecosystem services from forest land. If there is such positive impact of NGP, then we can eventually go into the other ecosystem services that shall have been produced, such as carbon sequestration, biodiversity enrichment, and the like, and possibly even forest recreation, and add on to watershed payments, these other payments for ecosystem services. And so the point here is that, as mentioned by our presenters, no single instrument is sufficient. There are various beneficiaries from ecosystem services, and they need to contribute to maintain the benefits over time. Okay. The second set of recommendations I would like to make to INREM and P-WES has to do with as a result of the analysis, the concerted effort to analyze, coming up with understandable integrated framework at the national level, not necessarily a tax or a payment at the national level, but a framework that could be used to guide the local governments and the local institutions come up with their customized schemes. We do have some legal support for some payments. We do have trained the tax reform that we did for acceleration and inclusion of economic growth, inclusivity of economic growth. Train was done in 2 parts 3 years ago. The third part was supposed to be on payments for environmental services, including taxation. And that has not yet been revived. There's probably no appetite for that now. It could be something that could be suggested for the next administration in a few years' time. We also have an instrument for capturing such payments for protected areas, like the IPAF. We have the IPAF fund. It is a unique fund in the sense that while most governments exercise the one fund concept, all revenues go to one fund, and it's the government that reallocates these revenues for expenditures. There was in the recent past, maybe 5 years ago, a setting aside of an integrated protected area fund. And that is supposed to be used to reinvest in protected area management. But the amounts there are minuscule, and therefore that it gives us more motivation to really learn better how more payments, either PES or other instruments, can be devised so that we will have sufficient funds for conserving biodiversity in our protected areas. Okay, now let me see now. CDO compensation of payments. I was enthused by EFTs. That was mentioned by Lei, because many of our LGUs are actually affecting each other, no? The upland LGUs and the lowland LGUs, and while in Cagayan de Oro, there is proof of interaction and collaboration that is not yet happening in most parts of the country. We have an institutional block here. Our LGUs officials are elected for only 3 years, and therefore their time frame is not long term, very short term. While they have avoided that problem by having their own relatives elected in their place, that might disappear soon, because we are for the moment we are already promulgating or reviving another effort to have a law that will deter this kind of practice. So the institutional issue is something that we really need to address. Okay, so legislative action at the local level is easier. There is the ordinance, and if there is considerable clamor from the local beneficiaries of ecosystem services, this can happen. But there is interlocking or interface between DNR, NCIP, and other government agencies and LGUs on who should really be stewards of our upland resources. And Our Land Use Act has not been enacted for a long time. And yet, if we are really talking about payments for ecosystem services, that has to be clarified. We don't have data on land use. We have data on land cover. Those are two different things, and the land users is so important to recognize. Those who protect and those who don't protect are so important to recognize if such PES schemes or PES-like schemes need to be implemented. So let's get together, do a retrospective analysis, but let's not stop there. And let's involve the implementers of different stages of PES, bearing in mind that there's important steps to be followed, that we should be in it for the long haul, and it should be seriously undertaken. So thank you for this opportunity to provide some comments.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Ann, for those meaningful reflections. Now, I hope your questions for our speaker and the discussant are ready. It's time for the second part of our open forum. You are all invited to actively participate. Please feel free to raise your hands virtually, or you can type your questions directly into our chat box or Q&A tab. The interactive session will be expertly moderated once again by Dr. Canesio D. Predo, who is an expert on payment for ecosystem services himself. Dr. Predo?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ma'am Check. So I'm not an expert. I'm just using the materials from Dr. Stefano in my class, and also the materials by Ma'am Ann de Los Angeles. So I use your materials in our class in the graduate and undergraduate courses. So it's nice to see you virtually. Although I know you for a long time, only in the paper, no. So good to hear from you right here in this webinar. But of course, Ma'am Ann, we always have some mini interaction. So going to the questions from the participants, there is one question that asks about from Eric Buduan. He's stating that government and private sector support and subsidies on food production, especially yellow corn in the uplands, are far much bigger than support for forest conservation. So in this context, how PAS address such kind of support and subsidies? Maybe Dr. Bagula?
So I'm having a bit of problems here. I just had to switch to my phone, so I think I missed part of your question.
I'll do it again. So government and private sector support and subsidies on food production, especially yellow corn in the uplands in many parts of the countries. These are far much bigger than support for forest conservation. So in this context, how may PAS address such?
Well, we'd have to look at. Sorry, am I? Yes, I'm. This may be an example of a kind of policy that is actually worsening deforestation by making alternatives to forests more attractive. And that's something that needs to be looked at. Some kinds of policies, for example, supporting irrigated rice is probably unlikely to affect most forests, because you can only do irrigated rice on flat land, and most forest that remains is on slopes. In fact, I did a study many years ago in Palawan where we looked at the impact of expanding an irrigated area in the lowlands. And what we found is that that expansion had actually reduced deforestation because a lot of people from the highlands came down to work in the irrigated area rather than staying on the sloping land where they would be doing deforesting. So we do have to be careful about which policies help and which hurt. And obviously policies have multiple objectives, which can be quite worthy. So avoiding deforestation is only one. But obviously, if one policy is causing a problem and doing another policy to offset that problem doesn't seem to make much sense. It would make more sense to try to revise the original policy so it doesn't cause problems by some means. But let me also take this opportunity to echo what Marian said. First, it's a pleasure to see Marian again. She was a former colleague at the bank for some time. And we actually co-wrote a book chapter together looking at the potential for PES in the Manupali watershed. That was 15 years ago, maybe. But I want to echo her call for a review of what's already been done on PES. As I mentioned, there was a number of pilot projects under the RUPES program at one point. There's also been a number of proposals. If you look at the literature, there's a number of proposals for PES program, but it's not at all clear whether any of them were actually implemented. And that's a common problem around the world. A lot of what you see in the published literature is often the proposal and not the actual program. One thing I would add, though, is in such a review, we should take a wide net, not look just at PES, but also look at all of the ways in which reforestation, for example, has been attempted. Because there's a lot we can learn even from things that weren't PES. In Colombia, for example, when we tried to use PES for silvopastoral practices, we immediately found that people couldn't, even if they, we had this nice shiny incentive for them to adopt silvopastoral practices, but they couldn't do it because there was no planting materials. The nurseries that they had in the country were the only thing they offered was exotic timber species. So fodder species, leguminous species just weren't there, and native species, forget it. So in order to be able for the PES to actually work, we had to develop a whole set of regional nurseries to produce planting materials, right? So there's a lot we can learn by efforts to do reforestation, to do adoption of new practices, to adoption of sustainable practices that have used other means, because they'll have come up with their own problems. If we don't have nurseries, then this won't work. If we don't address the participation of women-headed households, this won't work. Indigenous groups need particular kinds of rules and particular kinds of approaches. These are all lessons we can learn from other efforts to change land uses. So again, yes, let's look at what's been done in terms of PES, but that's probably a very small sample of things. But there's a very large universe of things that have been tried, and a lot of them we can learn from for what does work and what doesn't work as well.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Pagula, and thank you for also for the recommendations as suggested by Doc Ann about the retrospective PES analysis, which should be done to analyze the past PES initiatives and what will be done in terms of scales. No, so there's another question here from Jeffrey Losloso. I don't know who is targeting this question. Maybe also Ma'am Ann can also contribute if it's related to his discussion. And I would like to thank Ma'am Ann for giving context on the lecture of Dr. Pagula. The question is about, given that PE scheme relies on targeting highly heterogeneous cell tissue hotspots, how must the scheme's conditionality and payment structure be adapted to manage the uncontrolled socioeconomic pressures due to upland migration or development in those same critical source areas? A little bit difficult. Maybe any insight for this question?
Well, I often get that question in the context of urban development, right? And then Dr. Limona mentioned that this is one of the issues they had to deal with. Look, you're not going to fight off urban expansion with PES. It's just not going to happen. The returns per hectare of any kind of urban development are so high compared to any kind of agricultural land use that it simply won't happen. If you want to protect those areas, then you need to buy them and declare them protected areas. There's really very little you can do in terms of incentive-based instruments for that. Beyond that, most of the areas that we're worried about for things like siltation are typically not in areas threatened by urban growth. They're in highland areas. There might be some areas where people are developing, they're buying land for holiday houses, perhaps. There may be individual cases where there's some urban style development in the highland areas, but typically that's not the issue. So we're competing typically against fairly low value uses. We're competing against highland rice, we're competing against highland maize, extensive pastures. These are not terribly profitable land uses. These are subsistence land uses. So displacing them is often not a big lift. Again, individual exceptions, but that's where you need to understand the benefits of right. The minimum you need to pay is the opportunity cost. The maximum you should pay is the value of the service. Right, and there are some cases where the value of the service is high, and so you should be willing to pay quite a lot, and that makes perfect sense. And so if the value is very high, then even if the opportunity cost is high, then you pay it. On the other hand, in most cases, you can get away with paying a lot less because the opportunity cost is quite low. Case by case, which is, again, goes back to why a national scale approach, which tends to have to be one size fits all because of the scale, may not work so well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Pagula. Maybe Ma'am Ann can have some local experience that fits to that situation.
There is actually a considerable urban creep. Even if areas had been declared already as protected areas, or areas are under indigenous people's domain, ancestral domain claims, and this is a tough trend to handle. Part of it is we are not, we're not really monitoring land use changes, one. And second, not too many people appreciate ecosystem services. On that, I wanted to inform Stefano that the Philippine Ecosystems and Natural Capital Accounting system is now a law, is enacted. There's an IRR, and we are now assisting DNR reconfigure or look into their data systems to rationalize information, because there's a lot of information that's being gathered, but they don't necessarily lead us to better estimates of ecosystem services, which is part of the SEA effort. So this is, well, this is supposed to be national, but for sure there will be some targeting that will happen because we can't afford to do this on a nationwide scale. And targeting will probably be partly determined by apparent problems that already exist, like flooding and the like, siltation.
Okay. Thank you, Ma'am Ann, for that. And yeah, for the PINCAS law will be the valuation job task that can be maybe useful in the PAS initiatives in the Philippines. So another question here is about do you think planting fruit trees can support the PAS program while also helping upland village communities? So maybe anyone can provide insight on this?
I think it all depends what you're trying to achieve, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you need to do? There are areas that are so erosion prone and where the erosion goes directly into rivers that if that silt is a concern because it's affecting high value uses, then you probably want to reforest that area. It's going to be costly, but the benefits are going to be high because you're avoiding some very costly damages. In that case, I'd say, just bite the bullet and reforest. Now, there are many cases, though, where the benefits are not so high, the costs of inaction are not so high. And there are intermediate solutions, as I said in my presentation, intermediate solutions that are somewhere between the bad land uses of annual crops and the ideal sort of forest can be very useful. And there's a whole range of things, and fruit trees may be part of that, either as part of an agroforestry system or as an orchard. Again, fruit trees can mean all kinds of things. Some of them are very dense. And may be almost like a forest in terms of ground cover. Some of them are very sparse and so maybe not very effective. So we shouldn't speak specifically of fruit trees. Even agroforestry is a huge catch-all which can have a huge range of things, or silvopastoral practices. So we should consider these intermediates, absolutely, because they're going to be less costly. They'll have less benefits, but they'll be less costly. So you can choose between high effectiveness, high cost solutions and low effectiveness, low cost solutions. And case by case, in one case you may prefer one, in the other case you may prefer the other. But in a landscape approach, certainly I think fruit trees, agroforestry, all kinds of things will have their place.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I agree that it depends on the configuration of this sample fruit trees or agroforestry systems. Maybe they are not effectively trapping the erosion or contributing to water services, ecosystem service. Maybe this is the last.
Again, sorry, let me, if I can just add, you don't need to try to micromanage this, right? If you have estimates, the kinds of curves I was showing you, right, that those were for reforestation. We could do similar curves for agroforestry, right? And they'll probably show that they'll have a similar shape, but they'll be moved to the right, right? They'll have lower impact for any given amount of area treated. So you can do the evaluation. Okay, if I do 5 hectares of agroforestry or fruit trees, it'll give me the same reduction in sediment as 1 hectare of forest. Right, so I can say, okay, I'm going to offer you a payment of 100 to do agroforestry and of 500 to do forests. Right, and then let the landholders decide what they see, what is preferable to them. Right, we'll get the same benefits either way. We'll get the same cost benefit relationship either way, and they'll figure out what's best for them.
Yeah. So, Ma'am Ang, you have something to add?
Yeah, that really it's important point to take home, and that is you need to consider site specific suitability, markets, and the like, and do away with our previous effort of let's plant all Jumelina, mahogany, Nara all over the country. It's just so.
Or vetiver grass, or whatever the solution du jour
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. So maybe this is the last question. How can PAS be structured to ensure that indigenous communities perceive forest conservation as more economically and socially beneficial than converting their ancestral lands to crop-based land uses?
Well, I mean, there's quite a few examples of indigenous communities in being involved in PES. Costa Rica developed specific rules to work with indigenous groups. They couldn't use the standard PES rules they were using because they had things like a limit on 30 hectares. And indigenous groups collectively had thousands of hectares, so a 130-hectare contract really wouldn't help. But also for cultural reasons. They spoke different languages. They had all kinds of things. And so they had to develop particular rules. But ultimately, the incentives are there, right? The incentives are if you keep the forest, you get certain benefits from the forest, and they're often not very high. If you don't keep the forest, if you convert the forest to something else, they'll get higher benefits per hectare, even though that costs society things. So the basic problem is the same. A lot of people have argued that indigenous communities actually like forests. They place a value on forests. And so if that's true, to the extent that that's true, you may actually need lower payments for indigenous groups because they have a cultural benefit in addition to whatever physical benefits they might get. So i.e., left to their own devices, they would like to conserve forests, which if great. But ultimately, the pressures are the same. If they cleared them or part of them, they would get higher benefits per hectare. And so PES can help them, but helping them requires often particular rules. If only because indigenous communities often work collectively, right? So you need to have some kind of a collective contracting arrangement rather than individual household contracting arrangement. And that leads you into all kinds of problems, potential elite capture, for example. In Mexico, for example, where most of forests are community owned, what the program did is it had a rule that said that the application to participate in PES had to be approved by the community assembly. To try to avoid the elite capture problem. And in the same way, before they could receive the payments, they had to have a decision by the community assembly of how the payment would be used. There was no restriction on how they could be used. It was entirely up to the community, but there had to be evidence that the community had agreed to that particular use. Again, to avoid elite capture, which is always a problem when you have some kind of collective action issue. And there may be other subgroups that may be marginalized that you need to worry about, all kinds of issues that you need to worry about. But there's examples. There's obviously indigenous groups in Costa Rica are not the same as indigenous groups in the Philippines, but there's things we can learn from that application that at least qualitatively tell us something.
Yeah. So finally, there's a last question. This is the last question from our Dean of the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, UPLB. his questions about, based on the global case studies presented, who are the emerging champions that help institutionalize PAs on a larger scale? So maybe it's very helpful to our project, your insights on this.
Well, again, in terms of scale, again, you have the option between doing something like a national program, which would obviously have a large scale almost by definition, but at some cost in efficiency, at some cost in, or doing a more case by case, watershed by watershed approach. That would likely be much more efficient, but also dramatically smaller in terms of hectares covered. And I mean dramatically, right? Local scale programs, I know programs that cover as little as 13 hectares. Because there's a rural township that wants to protect its spring, and the area, the catchment of that spring is 13 hectares. So that's the scale of the whole program. So, compared to Mexico's national program of 3 million hectares, this is a tiny number. It's probably very effective 13 hectares. And the 3 million hectares, you probably have a big discount rate on that. But, the numbers are very different. So what are you trying to achieve? And the two are not mutually exclusive, right? You can imagine a national scale program that brings some national financing to top up local mechanisms. And that could be justified, for example, on carbon grounds, or some other mechanism. So we can think of ways to try to do a hybrid with a lot of local characteristics, but also trying to bring in some of the scale and the cost advantages of a much bigger program.
Yeah. So thank you so much. We have running out of time. So thank you so much, Dr. Pagula and Dr. Ann de Los Angeles, for your very informative lecture and discussions. Thank you so much. Back to you, Ma'am Check.
Okay, so change of insights, speakers, Dr. our insightful discussant, Dr. De Los Angeles, our engaged participants, and of course, Dr. Predo, for guiding such an energizing of thoughtful insights truly made the session successful. We thank the participants for being with us up to this time. I check a little past 2 p.m. and there were more than 80 participants. Now we still have more than 80 participants, signifying how PES and P-WES have generated interest not only among the academe, but also to other sectors of our society. Now, let's move on to the awarding of certificates. I'll be reading out the certificates, but please don't leave just yet. We still have our synthesis and closing remarks coming right up. Okay, so certificate of appreciation is awarded to Beria Lemona, PhD, for generously sharing their time, effort, and valuable insights during the webinar, What Lies Ahead, the Future of Payment for Water Ecosystem Services in the Philippines Through Global Perspectives, under the DO Steve Picard funded project titled Advocating for the Institutionalization of Payment for Water Ecosystem Service in the Philippines, held on December 4, 2025 via Zoom video conference, given this 4th day of December 2025. Signed by Dr. Juan M. Pulhin, PhD, Director of UPLB-INREM. And then the next certificate of appreciation is awarded to Stefano Pagiola for generously sharing their time, effort, and valuable insights during the webinar, What Lies Ahead, the Future of Payment for Water Ecosystem Services in the Philippines Through Global Perspectives, under the DOSTP card funded project titled Advocating for the Institutionalization of Payment for Water Ecosystem Service in the Philippines, held on December 4 via Zoom video conference, given this 4th day of December 2025, signed by Juan M. Pulhin, PhD, Director, UPLB-INREM. And then, certificate of appreciation is awarded to Marian de Los Angeles, PhD, for generously sharing their time, effort, and valuable insights as a reactor during the webinar, What Lies Ahead, the Future of Payment for Water Ecosystem Services in the Philippines Through Global Perspectives, under the DOSTP card-funded project titled Advocating for the Institutionalization of Payment for Water Ecosystem Services in the Philippines, held on December 4, 2025 via Zoom video conference, given this 4th of December 2025, signed by Juan M. Pulhin, PhD, Director of UPLB-INREM. Okay, so let's give another virtual round of applause to our speakers and discussant. Okay, I see your hands. Okay, so up next, to bring all of these incredible insights together and chart our course forward, we have the synthesis and ways forward, presented by Dr. Asa Jose Sahise, the P-WES Advocacy Project Leader. Dr. Sahise?
Thank you, Ma'am Check. I think everybody agrees this has been a afternoon full of ideas, and I think it's really hard to synthesize all this. I think even after today, we will be digesting all the insights. But at this point, I'd also like to thank Dr. Stefano Pagiola for being up until uh, this very, very early in the morning, Washington, D.C. Lei also for sharing her insights, and of course, our very ever supportive Dr. Ann for the discussions that she offered as well. So the webinar integrates basically the global lessons from of PES from Dr. Pagiola down to the landscape finance and governance innovations from Dr. Lei. Together, I think they offer, together with the insights given by Doc Ann, offer a roadmap for institutionalizing or forming PES in the Philippines. So I think the urgency of PES or any watershed conservation strategy is really, the urgency is now, as what Dr. Pagiola showed earlier. And PES has shown to be a viable mechanism, not the silver bullet, but a mechanism, one of the mechanisms that can reverse this degradation. So basically, PES, as discussed today, aligns with incentives of compensating land users for generating ecosystem services, and it works best when payments are conditional on specific monitored actions and when additionality and long-term financing is ensured. But Dr. Lei also highlighted that watersheds operate within a socio-ecological system, and PES should be complemented by integrated landscape investments, including carbon funds, CSR, EFTs, microloans to support sustainable agriculture and ecosystem restoration. I think both presentations stress the need for technical targeting, uh, as discussed by Dr. Pagyola. Hydrological impacts are heterogeneous, and in the case of Rehoso, uh, Dr. Lei showed that there has been the use of aquifer mapping, infiltration baseline, and other land use diagnostics to actually target intervention. So basically, I think the lesson is that there is efficiency through science. So basically, we have to go away from the previous idea that we need to plant anything and plant everywhere approach, but rather uh, we need to do spatial targeting. And with the advent of the uh, GIS and remote sensing, there are now lots of tools that we can use. There is also that pivot from simple conservation to restoration, but restoration that actually would lead to land uses that eventually become self-sustaining, like agroforestry. We have seen that PES is not only a financial instrument, it is also a social negotiation. As Dr. Lay showed us, there is a bit of degree of trust building, facilitation, and local institution strengthening that are necessary for long-lasting behavioral change. Um, Emphasis was also shown for user finance and long-term PES, and Dr. Lemon expanded this into blended financing model, including ecological fiscal transfers that reward LGUs for ecological performance and green investment instruments that diversify funding. There is also a recommendation for an institutional model needed for PES where both the national and the local levels have different roles. The ANA model, for instance, bridges the gaps between a national policy and the flexibility that should be afforded for local implementation. And I think the Philippines should contemplate on this framework and it really re-echoes what the research team is thinking about when we are thinking about institutionalizing PES, that at the national level, we don't develop a national program that stifles local flexibility. But rather than having a centralized PES system, the Philippines should establish possibly at the national level a hub that provides standardized templates, monitoring protocols, and probably seed funding as well to local water districts and local LGUs. This reduces the high transaction costs that may spell doom for small-scale Philippine projects. In conclusion, PES in the Philippines should move or graduate from pilots to institutionalization by combining strong conditional PES designs with integrated landscape financing, multi-stakeholder but harmonized governance, and possible ecological fiscal incentives when we move beyond different jurisdictions. Together, these approaches offer a sustainable pathway to protect watersheds, enhance livelihoods, and build a climate resilience. A pathway which we saw is a common aspiration, regardless of whether you are in the Philippines, in Indonesia, or elsewhere. So, with that, I think I end the hopefully a judicious synthesis and back to you, Check. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sahise, for that truly comprehensive and forward-looking synthesis. And to cap off a truly enriching afternoon, we are honored to present our closing remarks from another natural resource governance expert, Dean Marlo D. Mendoza of the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, UPLB. Marlo.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the UPLB College of Forestry and Natural Resources, allow me to extend my deepest gratitude to Dr. Beria Leimone, Dr. Stefano Pagiola, and to Dr. Marian de Los Angeles, so our distinguished speakers and reactors. And to the participants who have stayed this long, still more than 80 listening. And partners who have joined us in this culminating session. Your presence and insights have made today's dialogue enriching and inspiring as well. The college takes pride in seeing how the P-WES or PS webinar series has grown into a platform for learning, reflection, and collaboration. Over the past months, we have explored many dimensions of payment for water ecosystem services. And today, through global perspectives, we are reminded that our work here in the Philippines is part of a larger movement toward sustainable and inclusive governance of our natural resources. Actually, I have more to read, but I think Dr. Asa has already summarized that very well, no? But this webinar marks the conclusion of the P-WES webinar series, but it is not the end of the conversation. Rather, it is a milestone in a continuing journey, one that calls us to deepen collaboration, strengthen institutions, and affirm the role of communities and stewards as partners in shaping our collective future. I encourage everyone to carry forward the spirit of this series, to learn, to adapt, and to co-create. With shared vision and collective action, we can build systems of governance that are inclusive, effective, and responsive to the challenges of our time and context. Once again, thank you for your time, commitment, and collaboration. May this be the beginning of even stronger partnerships as we work together to institutionalize P-WES in the Philippines and advance the vision of sustainable water governance. With that, I formally close today's session. Maraming salamat, and I look forward to continuing this journey with you toward a future where our ecosystems, communities, and institutions thrive together.
Thank you, Dean Marlo, for those very inspiring words. Okay, so please take a moment to scan the QR code or visit the form. I also valuable to us and will be sending out your certificates after validating your attendance. This webinar would not be possible without the support of our capable P-WES advocacy team members and the UPLB-INREM staff. A huge shout out also goes to Department of Science and Technology, Philippine Council for Agriculture, Aquatic, and Natural Resources, Research and Development, or DOST, PCARD, for their unwavering and continued support for this project. We also wish to announce that we will be having our National Summit on Payment for Water Ecosystem Services on February next year, 2026. Details will be announced at the UPLB-INREM Facebook page. So keep updated by following us, no? On our Facebook page. Thank you all, and we hope You are leaving with new learnings, fresh perspectives, and a renewed passion for payment for water ecosystem services. You may check the recording of this webinar on UPLB-INREM's YouTube channel. Please stay tuned for our next INREM UPLB-INREM webinar. This is Check signing off. Thank you and have a great week ahead. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.